Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt absolutely nothing staring back? They smiled. They said all the right things, but deep down, something inside you whispered, this person isn't really here. That quiet unease you felt, it wasn't in your head. It was your soul recognizing something your mind couldn't explain. In this video, we're going to explore a truth most people avoid, and by the end, you'll know exactly how to spot it and how to protect yourself from it. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt nothing looking back? A moment where the body was present, but the presence was not, where a handshake felt like a transaction and a smile like a mask. Some people walk through life without ever truly being alive. And what if they were never meant to be? This video isn't just about human behavior, it's about something deeper, something ancient, unsettling, and rarely discussed aloud: soulless beings. Are there people who walk among us without a soul, or have they simply lost touch with it? What does this say about consciousness, about humanity, about you? Today, we'll explore the enigma of soulless beings through philosophy, spirituality, psychology, and lived experience, not to judge, but to understand, and maybe, just maybe, to remember who we are by facing those who forgot. So settle in, open your heart, and let's begin. And to truly begin this journey, we must first ask a question as old as time itself. What is the soul, really? In a world filled with awe-inspiring acts of compassion, creativity, and connection, there exists a disturbing undercurrent. Those moments when we encounter a human face but sense no true presence behind the eyes. It's as if a vital spark is missing. We might describe them as cold, manipulative, detached, or more hauntingly as soulless. While such a label carries heavy philosophical and emotional weight, the idea of soulless beings is not merely poetic. It taps into one of humanity's oldest and most elusive mysteries. What truly defines a conscious, sentient being? This question leads us into murky waters. Are all humans born with a soul? Can a person lose it? Or were some among us never truly connected to one at all? These are not questions to be answered easily. They rest at the crossroads of spirituality, psychology, ethics, and metaphysics, fields that often speak different languages but point toward a shared concern: the nature of authentic personhood. Across ancient scriptures, mystical traditions, and modern neuroscience, the concept of the soul has been revered, questioned, and reinterpreted. From Plato's assertion of an eternal psyche, to the Buddhist idea of anatta, non-self, to Carl Jung's exploration of the shadow self, Jahrheitshin, the soul has served as both compass and mirror, guiding seekers toward truth while reflecting the deepest paradoxes of human existence. And yet, we must pause and ask, what happens when this soul seems absent in another human being? What does it mean to encounter someone who appears to lack empathy, depth, or inner light, not due to trauma or illness, but as a defining trait? Are such individuals simply misunderstood, or do they represent a different type of human experience altogether? This isn't merely a matter of poetry or mysticism. It touches something raw and real: a fear, a knowing, a recognition that some faces do not reflect back our shared humanity. This chapter explores what the soul has meant across time and why its absence feels so disturbing. And with that unsettling truth in our hands, we now turn to a more pressing mystery. What if some of these beings, those who lack warmth, depth, and resonance, aren't simply lost but fundamentally different? Let's now explore the signs and stories behind them in Chapter 2. The phenomenon of soulless beings. Now that we've explored the soul's meaning across cultures and time, a deeper question arises: not just what the soul is, but what happens when it's missing. Have you ever spoken with someone who said all the right things, smiled at the right moments, but left you feeling strangely cold inside? Like a conversation with an echo, familiar on the surface, but eerily hollow underneath. That experience, that quiet unease, sits at the heart of one of humanity's most haunting questions. Are there people who walk among us without a soul? Let's explore what defines these so-called soulless beings and how they often show themselves in subtle, disturbing ways. Emptiness behind the mask. Soulless beings, as popularly conceived, don't always appear abnormal. In fact, that's exactly what makes them so unsettling. They may be charming, articulate, even successful, but something is missing. They exhibit a flat affect, a strange disconnection from the emotional reality of others. They may lack empathy, remorse, or the ability to form true bonded relationships. And it's not just what they do, it's what they don't feel. According to psychological studies, these traits echo the clinical definitions of psychopathy or sociopathy, but some accounts go even deeper, describing a kind of mechanical behavior, like a person acting out a script without actually being there. Their speech is smooth, but emotionally shallow. Their intentions seem calculated, not heartfelt. In some circles, they're said to drain the energy of others, not just emotionally, but spiritually, a feeling survivors often describe as being erased over time. You begin to doubt yourself, then your memory, then your sense of reality, and finally, your soul. Anonymous survivor. And yet, the shadow these beings cast stretches even further, not only through real life encounters, but through the stories we've told for generations. Cultural reflections, hollow characters, and moral nightmares, stories have always warned us of such beings. Think of Dracula, feeding off life but never truly alive, or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where the creature ironically shows more soul than his creator. Even modern media reflects this unease. In Harry Potter, the Dementors don't kill, they leave you emptied. In Blade Runner and Ex Machina, sentient machines mimic humanity, but lack something fundamental. And what is that something? Presence, depth, soul. Even in pop culture, we intuitively sense there's a difference between functioning like a human and being fully human. But fiction is not the only place this archetype appears. Beyond fiction, many people report real world experiences that echo this archetype. Survivors of toxic relationships often describe feeling spiritually starved, as if their partner lacked empathy not due to stress or trauma, but as a defining trait. Some spiritual traditions speak of energy vampires. Others describe organic portals, biological humans without individualized consciousness. These concepts may sound fringe, but they emerge again and again in different cultures under different names, and they all point to the same unease. There was someone in front of me, but no one inside them. Of course, psychology offers explanations: trauma, detachment, personality disorders. But some practitioners, especially energy healers and mystics, believe there's more at play. They describe people whose core essence seems absent, not asleep, not wounded, but truly absent. Whether literal or symbolic, these accounts leave a powerful imprint. Still, what if we've seen this figure before, not just in others, but as a reflection of something deeper in ourselves? Carl Jung might interpret this figure as the shadow, a projection of our disowned fears. When we call someone soulless, are we seeing a truth or facing parts of ourselves we're afraid to name? Maybe both. Still, even Jung acknowledged the reality of the archetype, not just as symbol, but as lived experience. In this sense, the soulless being becomes a mirror, reflecting not only who they are, but what we deny in ourselves and what we long to protect. So, what do we make of it all? Is the soulless being a myth, a metaphor, a psychological condition? Or could it be something real? Something that walks beside us, sits across from us, even sleeps next to us, yet remains untethered from what it means to be alive. And if we can recognize what it means to be soulless, then perhaps we're also being asked to rediscover what it means to live with soul. And that search for meaning takes us one step further into the realm of the sacred. Next, we'll journey through temples and ancient texts to ask, what do the great spiritual traditions say about beings who walk without soul? Let's continue with Chapter 3, Spiritual Interpretations and Debates. So far, we've explored the unsettling signs, the chilling presence or absence of something vital in certain individuals. But to truly understand this phenomenon, we must expand our vision beyond psychology or story. We must enter the sacred, the symbolic, the timeless teachings that have tried again and again to make sense of those who appear alive but feel spiritually hollow. Across temples and scrolls, sutras, and sacred texts, there runs a thread of mystery. Not all who walk in flesh carry the same light within. Different spiritual traditions have tried to answer the same question: can someone appear human and yet be devoid of a soul? Let's begin this sacred exploration by traveling east to where the soul is seen not just as a concept, but as a core essence of being. In Hinduism, the soul, Atman, is sacred and eternal. It is the true self hidden beneath the mind, body, and ego, not separate from Brahman, but one with the divine whole. According to the Bhagavad Gita, even the most lost person carries this spark. But when buried under ignorance, avidya, ego, ahamkara, and karma, it can be forgotten, not gone, but unreachable. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror by dust, as the embryo by the womb, so the soul is obscured by desire. Bhagavad Gita 38. In this view, a soulless person isn't lacking a soul, they're simply unaware of it. Meanwhile, Buddhism offers a radically different take. Through the lens of anatta, non self, Buddhism teaches that there is no fixed permanent soul. Instead, what we call self is a bundle of ever shifting aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Soullessness here isn't a defect, it's a misunderstanding of reality. And yet, even Buddhism holds space for suffering beyond comprehension. In Tibetan cosmology, there exists the realm of the hungry ghosts, Prita, beings consumed by craving, utterly cut off from satisfaction and spiritual clarity. Some teachers draw a parallel here. What if soullessness in this world reflects a similar karmic condition, an incarnation marked not by malice, but by deep spiritual starvation? It's a sobering thought. But these are not the only ancient traditions that wrestled with the hollow and the hidden. Let us now turn west to the mystical roots of Judaism, Christianity, and Gnosticism. In Kabbalistic Judaism, the soul is a multi-layered entity: nefesh, ruach, neshama. Some mystics believe not all people carry these layers equally. And then there is the concept of kelipot, hollow husks that appear alive but lack divine light. They resist the flow of spirit. They act, speak, even seduce, but only from the outer shell. According to Lurianic Kabbalah, part of the soul's mission is to extract sparks of light trapped in these shells, or to recognize and walk away when no spark remains. In Gnostic Christianity, we find another vision. Texts like Pistis Sophia speak of three kinds of humans: helix, bound to matter; psychics, guided by soul; pneumatics, awakened in spirit. Helix, those driven purely by flesh, were considered unreachable by gnosis, not because they were evil, but because they lacked the inner flame needed to remember. Here, soullessness is not moral failure, it is spiritual non-participation. Even Christian mystics spoke of the dark night of the soul, where divine presence vanishes. Some warned that the soul can become dormant through sin or even distant by willful separation, but they never claimed it was permanently lost, only asleep, waiting for grace. Still, in both East and West, there is a recurring pattern. Not everyone is connected to soul in the same way, and some may be walking through life disconnected entirely. But what about today? In a world filled with self-help gurus, energy workers, and awakened voices, do modern spiritual teachers still speak of the soulless? In today's spiritual world, the language has changed, but the mystery remains. Deepak Chopra describes the soul as a field of awareness. It is always there, beneath the ego, behind the roles. Disconnection isn't absence, it's illusion. Eckhart Tolle calls this disconnection egoic unconsciousness. He reminds us many people function in society, but they're not present. They're not here. And so they feel empty because they are not in contact with themselves. In energy healing and intuitive circles, we find even more direct language: walk-ins, soulless shells, energetic imposters. Some believe these beings were born without a full soul or lost theirs through trauma or karmic collapse. Controversial? Yes, but symbolically powerful because they give voice to a universal experience. I met someone who wasn't really someone. Still, caution is key. These terms must never be used to shame, dehumanize, or elevate ourselves. They are symbols, not weapons. And yet, despite differences in form, these teachings all seem to agree on one truth: that the soul is not just an idea, it is an experience. And when it is absent or obscured, we feel it in our bones, in our breath. And that recognition is not a curse, it's a call. So now, having explored the sacred and symbolic, we turn our attention to the scientific and social. What if some forms of soullessness are rooted not in the soul, but in the mind, the brain, or even the world around us? Let's continue with Chapter 4, Psychological and Sociological Considerations, when the absence of soul has scientific roots or social causes. Having walked through sacred texts and mystical cosmologies, we now take a different turn, not away from truth, but toward another lens that may explain what the soul alone cannot. Because not all emptiness is spiritual. Sometimes it's neurological, sometimes it's historical, and sometimes it's cultural. What if what we call soullessness isn't always a mystical void, but a mirror held up by science, trauma, and the modern world? Let's begin by examining the human mind itself. In psychology, traits we often associate with soulless people tend to fall under specific diagnoses: most notably antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, and psychopathy. Psychopaths, in particular, are often described as emotionally cold, manipulative, and devoid of empathy. And what's more chilling is how normal they can appear. They smile, they speak well, they hold power, but behind their eyes, there is stillness, a calculated quiet. Dr. Robert Hare, creator of the psychopathy checklist, describes these individuals as showing shallow affect, glib charm, callousness, no remorse. And brain scans reveal something even more unsettling. Psychopaths often exhibit reduced activity in the regions of the brain responsible for empathy and moral reasoning. They see suffering, but feel nothing. Does that mean they're soulless? Not necessarily. Many psychologists warn us, do not moralize mental health conditions. And yet, the overlap between neurological absence and moral emptiness is impossible to ignore. Sometimes the science sounds a lot like the myth, but let's not stop there, because emptiness can arise not from disorder, but from deep emotional injury. Trauma's silent signature. Not all soullessness is calculated. Sometimes it's a form of survival. In trauma survivors, a different kind of emptiness emerges, one not born of coldness, but of fragmentation. This is dissociation. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk in The Body Keeps the Score explains how trauma can split the psyche. A person may seem cold or distant, but it's not because they're soulless. It's because their soul had to go into hiding to survive. I feel like a ghost in my own life, like I'm watching myself from behind a screen. Trauma survivors. In shamanic traditions, this is known as soul loss, not metaphorically, literally. A piece of the soul fragments flees, and the person remains as a hollowed version of themselves. But here's the hope. The healing is not in judgment, but in reintegration. Modern therapies like internal family systems, IFS, and somatic experiencing attempt this very process, that retrieving lost parts, making the soul feel safe to return. So what may appear as soullessness may in fact be a silent plea for safety. But what if the issue runs even deeper, beyond the individual? Now let's zoom out, far beyond the personal into the systemic. What if the world itself encourages disconnection? Sociologist Emil Durkheim called it anomie, a breakdown of shared values and meaning. In such a state, people stop believing in anything greater. Life becomes routine, connection, a transaction. Think of the corporate ladder, social media personas, the pressure to perform, produce, and compete. Where in that is the space for soul? Philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this era the burnout society, a culture of exhaustion, simulation, and spiritual starvation. Even postmodern thinkers like John Baudrillard warn us, we now live in simulacra, copies of copies. People wear roles, they smile for status, and underneath, many feel nothing. Here, soullessness isn't pathology, it's adaptation. Adaptation to a world that forgot how to feel. But with this understanding comes a danger. The danger of using the word soulless to judge, exclude, or even harm. This is developing into a deeply thoughtful and powerful series. Your tone carefully balances discernment with compassion, and the pacing invites both reflection and emotional engagement. You've framed the concept of soullessness with spiritual, psychological, and cultural depth, while wisely including cautions against misuse. If you're heading into Chapter 5 next, navigating encounters with soulless beings, a few themes you might explore could include energetic boundaries, how to sense when your energy is being drained or manipulated, and how to protect it. Discernment versus judgment, tools for recognizing harm without slipping into dehumanization or superiority. Spiritual hygiene, practices for clearing, grounding, and recentering after disturbing encounters. The power of presence, how staying connected to your own soul is the best defense against those who seem disconnected from theirs. Would you like help drafting Chapter 5? When the absence of soul enters your life, how do you protect your own? Now that we've explored what soullessness looks like from ancient wisdom to modern science, the question becomes far more personal. Not just, do they exist, but what do I do when I meet one? You may already be thinking of someone, a face you once trusted, a presence that once felt familiar, but now makes you shiver. This chapter isn't about fear, it's about discernment. It's about how to protect your light without becoming bitter or blind. So let's walk this together, step by step, into clarity. Your soul's first line of defense. First and foremost, remember this. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Soulless individuals, whether by nature or wound, often operate through subtle manipulation, emotional confusion, energetic draining. They don't always confront you head on. They erode your clarity quietly, consistently over time. That's why boundaries aren't just psychological, they're spiritual. Dr. Judith Herman, a pioneer in trauma therapy, emphasizes the importance of withdrawing from toxic dynamics. And in the world of energy healing, we find even more tools: protective visualizations, cord cutting rituals, grounding exercises after toxic contact. Some visualize a field of light around them, a shimmering boundary that says, I see you, but I will not merge with your void. Whatever practice you choose, the key is clarity. Know when to say no. Know when to exit the room. Know that your soul is not up for negotiation. And once you've established that boundary, it's time to go deeper, not away from the world, but back into yourself, deep in your own light. When you feel the coldness of another, don't just turn your back, turn inward, return to your own center. Because the greatest protection isn't retreat, it's radiance. Here are some daily spiritual practices to anchor your soul: stillness meditation to reconnect with essence, journaling, especially shadow journaling, to process inner reactions, breathwork or chanting to clear energetic residue, rituals of light, candle prayers, sacred texts, grounding walks in nature. Friend, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be present. As teacher Caroline Miss once said, your energetic integrity is your spiritual immune system. To live with soul means not chasing, not fixing, not rescuing those who are committed to emptiness, but still, we must also learn how to see with clear eyes, seeing clearly without condemning. Sometimes the person in front of you isn't evil, they're lost. Other times, they're not lost. They're calculated and cold. That's why discernment is more than a skill, it's a sacred act. Ask yourself, how do I feel around this person? Am I shrinking? Am I constantly doubting myself? Am I the one giving while they remain unmoved? These aren't accusations, they're inner check-ins. Not every cold person is soulless. Some are wounded, some are neurodivergent, some are simply exhausted. So don't rush to label, but also don't ignore your body's wisdom. If your nervous system contracts, if your chest tightens, if your intuition whispers danger, that is your soul speaking. Listen. But even in discernment, we must remember healing does not happen in isolation. Community and connection, healing together. Perhaps the most dangerous thing a soulless encounter can do is make you doubt yourself. You begin to question your perceptions. You wonder if maybe you're the problem. And that is why community is essential, not just casual friendships, but soul witnesses. People who see you, who validate what you've felt, who remind you, you're not crazy, you're not broken, you're not alone. Find a therapist, join a spiritual group, reach out to those who understand the language of soul. Because sometimes healing isn't about fixing, it's about being held. And slowly you begin to remember that you're not fragile, you're not empty, you're made of light and will and truth. Even if someone once tried to convince you otherwise, soulless beings are not just threats, they are reminders. Reminders of what you're not, reminders of what you must protect. And strangely, even sacred teachers pushing you to live with more soul than ever before, because in a world that numbs, you chose to feel. In a world that fakes, you chose to be real, and that is the beginning of awakening. But what does it truly mean to live with soul after encountering the soulless? What have we really learned? Not just about them, but about ourselves. Let's now step into the final chapter: what soulless beings teach us about being fully alive. And now, as we reach the end of this journey, let's take a breath and ask ourselves, what have we truly uncovered today? We've seen that not everyone who walks, smiles, or speaks like us is alive in the same way. That soulfulness isn't defined by words or appearances, but by presence, by resonance, by energy. We've learned that soulless beings are not myth. They are not just literary metaphors. They're real. And they are often far closer than we think. They exist not in some distant corner of the world, but sometimes in our own families, our workplaces, our spiritual circles. And yet, here's the deeper truth: they cannot steal your soul. They cannot extinguish your light. They only draw from what we give away unknowingly, through fear, through doubt, through misplaced trust. But the moment you become aware, the moment you stop explaining and start feeling, the moment you stop chasing and simply stand, they lose access. Because here's what they will never possess: your capacity to love without reason, your ability to grow through pain, your soul's quiet knowing that it belongs to something greater. You are the guardian of your energy. Your soul is not fragile, it is sacred. It is made of something that cannot be replicated, cannot be imitated, and will never be controlled. And perhaps, just perhaps, the most ironic gift of all, the more soulless beings you encounter, the more deeply you learn what it means to live with soul. You begin to see with new eyes, to protect your peace with new fire, to honor your aliveness with new reverence. So today, let this not be the end of a video. Let it be the beginning of a deeper commitment to live with integrity, to speak from truth, to walk with soul even when the path feels lonely. You were never meant to fit in with the hollow. You were meant to remember, and remembering is how the world heals. If this message touched something deep in you, share it, pass it forward. Let someone else know they're not alone in what they've felt, in what they've always sensed. Leave a comment below. Yes, I've met one, or now I understand what I've always felt. And if your soul feels lighter, stronger, clearer, then this was never just a video. It was a mirror, a moment of truth, a spark, reminding you who you've always been. Here at Awaken Wisdom, we believe that remembering your soul is the first step to reclaiming your life. If this message stirred something in you, please consider subscribing, not just to a channel, but to a deeper journey. Leave a comment below. Have you ever met someone who felt empty? Have you ever had to protect your soul from someone who didn't see it? We read every message. This is a space where seekers speak, where souls recognize each other. Like this video if it resonated. Tap the bell so you don't miss what's next. And if you know someone who's questioning their light, share this with them. It might be the reminder they've been waiting for. You were never meant to forget who you are, and now you won't. You're watching Awaken Wisdom, where ancient truth meets your inner knowing.